Okay, good. Why don't we go ahead and kick off? And I'm sure that more people will continue to join in the next few minutes. Well, welcome to everybody again to this edition of the Data for Peace Dialogue. We're very pleased today to be partnered with the Pathfinders Having Global Violence Initiative, Peace in Our Cities, and also the Stanley Center for this discussion, which is about smart cities. And it is asking the question of, is this opportunity or is this risk? Smart cities are inevitable at this point. So how can we think about them in a way that harnesses them for prevention and peace building, these technologies for peace building and prevention aims, particularly, for example, around social cohesion and trust. And so those are some of the issues that will be surfacing today with this truly international group of speakers. And I do want to quickly get to the panel, but I have just a few housekeeping items to tell you about first. And one of those is to say that we're really delighted to say that this webinar will be available in both Korean and English. I think there are some instructions in the chat, but you can just navigate down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where you see the word interpretation and click on that. And then you can choose the language that this will be coming to you in. So it is simultaneous translation. And I would also like to give a special thank you to the Stanley Center for their support for this interpretation and also on the technical side today for this meeting. And then I just wanted to quickly highlight two things. First is that we have a new paper coming out this month that argues for the need for a more centralized hub for data for the prevention and peace building field. So we'll send an announcement about that shortly, but it comes from the international workshop that we did last December on lessons learned from the humanitarian sector on data-driven approaches to in fragile and conflict-affected countries. So please do look out for that. And then the last item is to say that this will be my last Data for Peace dialogue. My last day at CIC will be on June 30th. So I just wanted to take this chance to say farewell to all of you. Together with Branka, we've been leading this work on building an ecosystem on data for peace approaches since 2018, also in partnership with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I'll continue to work in this space. You will continue to see me visibly, and I'll continue to work with Branka and CIC as well. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of you for being part of this growing ecosystem and really this movement for more data-driven approaches to peace building and prevention. So with that, let me hand straight over to Branka and we can get into the discussion. Thanks again, Branka, over to you.
Thank you, Paige, and thank you for really all your support in the previous 2 years in the implementation of Data for Peace Dialogues. Welcome, everybody, to our June edition. For those of you who are new to our series, I'm Branka Panic, and I'm a non-resident fellow at NYU CIC, and I will be moderating our discussion today. I would actually like to invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat, maybe in the spirit of today's topic of smart cities. Tell us in which city you are based in, and maybe if you're familiar about any initiative, smart city project that is happening in your city, and then we will have a quick look in the chat. And while you are typing, I will share quickly just how we decided to cover this maybe somewhat unusual topic for our webinar series. And we had multiple conversations over the previous year with our colleagues from, as Paige introduced, from the Peace in Our Cities initiative, which is co-managed by Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, which is as well as Data for Peace based at the NYU Center on International Cooperation, and also their partners at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice and Stanley Center for Peace and Security. And with this webinar, we are basically creating synergies of our partners' incredible body of work on peace in our cities and their expertise on how to reduce violence in cities. and also the expertise of our community of practice of data for peace practitioners and data-driven methodologies to sustain peace. And why do we think this conversation is timely and needed? Just a couple of notes on this. And first, cities are already half of the world's population and are expected to grow. And 56% of the world's population will be living in cities by 2040. And at the same time, the risk of urban violence is ever present and threatening the prosperity of cities and its residents, and particularly those who are most vulnerable. And then secondly, and parallel to these trends in city developments, another trend is spreading across the world, and this is development of emerging technologies, and something that we actively covered in our dialogues with these different trends in big data, data development, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And many of these approaches are being deployed under the umbrella of smart city projects. So what we are asking now is, can or could smart city approaches to urban development help and aid reducing violence and building community safety? Or will they maybe bring even more risks to peace in our cities? Or maybe it's not that easy to answer with yes and no. And we will hear more about this from our amazing panelists today. And we are thrilled to be joined by our guests and experts from all parts of the world, from West Coast to Korea. It's really my pleasure to welcome you all and invite you to share your perspectives on how can we navigate now the space of smart cities in between, as Paige said, opportunities and challenges, and help us understand if smart cities are an ally or sometimes maybe even an enemy to peace in our cities. So with this, I would like to welcome and introduce our speakers. Junyoung Choi, who is the director of the Center for Data Science at Seoul City Institute of Technology in South Korea. Renee Cummings, who is AI ethicist, criminologist, data activist in residence at the University of Virginia and community scholar at Columbia University. Maria Isabel Couto, who is program director at Fogo Cruzado, joining us from Brazil, and Daniel Mack, who is program lead on halving global violence, joining us or co-hosting this webinar basically with us from Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. So our guests will have around 5 to 7 minutes each to tell us their views about the topic, tell us a little bit about their work and their background in this topic, and then we will open for questions from or comments from the audience. Feel free to type your questions in the chat throughout the discussion, and I will collect those and open the discussion when the time comes. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, who is joining us from South Korea, Dr. Choi, who, just a quick note, also worked on Safer Cities program at UN Habitat in 2018, which is very relevant for our topic today. And also in 2020 joined the Department of Smart City Research at Seoul Institute of Technology. So we are really looking forward to hear more about this work that you are doing. Dr. Choi, the floor is yours. You can unmute yourself. And perfect, great.
Hello, I'm Junyoung Choi. I'm working at the Seoul Institute of Technology as a research fellow, and before joining the SIT, I was working at the state-owned enterprise, Korea Land and House Corporation, and also STEP secondment in United Nations Human Settlement Program as a consultant for preparing the global smart safe city challenge project with the UN Habitat. And directly, I would like to present my experience about the smart and safe city. My presentation will help with two interpreter in Korea. Yeah. 잘 보이시나요? 네. 제가 오늘 소개할 내용은 스마트 안전 도시에 대한 내용이고요. 2015년부터 2022년까지의 제 경험에 대해서 소개해 드리려고 합니다. 그래서 세 가지의 사례를 설명을 드릴 텐데요. 첫 번째는 2021년도에 작년에 제가 현재 지금 있는 연구원에서 하고 있는 발표한 자료입니다. 먼저 스마트 안전도시를 말하기 전에 스마트 시티와 안전도시에 대한 개념이 많기 때문에 먼저 그거 내용에 대해서 간단하게 설명을 드리려고 하고요. 그래서 안전이라고 한다면은 여러 가지 측면이 있을 겁니다. 지금 오늘 다루고자 하는 그 평화, 피스, 세이프티 앤 시큐리티에 대한 부분도 있을 거고요. 아니면은 그 인프라스트럭처나 아니면은 건강이나 최근에 많이 관심을 가지고 있는 디지털 시큐리티도 있을 것입니다. 그래서 이런 거에 대해 관심을 가져서 뭐 이코노미스트에서는 안전도시라고 하는 지표를 만들어서 평가를 하고 있는 걸로 알고 있고요. 마찬가지로 스마트 시티에 대해서도 국제 전개통신연합 ITU에서는 이제 100가지가 넘는 정의가 있다고 합니다. 그래서 매우 다양한 정의가 있고 최근에는 스마트폰을 통해 가지고 모든 서비스가 이루어지고 도시에서의 이런 쇼핑이라든가 이런 활동들이 이루어지기 때문에 스마트폰, 모바일 플랫폼 시티라는 것으로 표현되기도 하고 전통적으로 지속 가능한 도시가 현재는 그 스마트 시티라는 것으로 발전하기도 하고 과거부터 축소해왔던 인텔리전트 시티라는 말도 스마트 시티와 비슷하게 유사하게 쓸 수가 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 주로 우리가 다루고자 하는 한국이나 아니면 동아시아 특히나 중국이나 우리나라 한국 같은 경우에서는 이 스마트 시티를 IT 기술을 이용해서 도시를 개발하고 도시에게 서비스를 제공하는 쪽에 좀 더 많은 포커스를 맞춰왔고요. 서울시에서의 스마트 시티는 6S라는 것으로 표현을 해서 다양한 IT 기술을 이용해서 시민들한테 편의를 제공해주는 서비스를 제공해주는 도시라고 표현을 하고 있습니다. 물론 제가 바로 직전에 근무했던 공기업인 한국토지주택공사라고 하는 곳에서는 대규모의 여러 가지 신도시, 뉴타운과 함께 스마트 시티를 전 세계적으로 많은 스마트 시티를 건설하는 회사이기도 합니다. 마찬가지로 안전도시라고 하는 것은 이제 조금 글로벌하게 스탠더드한 개념 중에서 몇 가지를 골라보자면은 이제 유엔의 그 기구 중에서 WHO에서는 인조리로부터 보호하는 것을 안전이라고 하고 있고, 그 다음에 UNDRR에서는 리질리언트 도시 회복력 측면에서 재해 예방이란 측면에서 안전 롤모델 시티라고 하는 안전을 다루고 있습니다. 그리고 오늘 이 피스라고 하는 것에 관련돼서는 세이프티나 시큐리티라고 한다면은 유엔 해비tat에서 제가 근무하게 됐던 유엔 해비tat에서 스마트 시티 프로그램이라고 하는 것이 있고 거기서 이제 어반 도시 범죄 예방이라고 하는 것을 제도적 범죄와 폭력 예방, 그다음에 사회적 범죄 예방, 그리고 물리적 환경 이렇게 해서 구분을 해서 접근을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 제가 작년에 다루었던 스마트하고 안전한 도시라고 하는 것은 스마트 기술을 가지고선 도시의 안전에 적용함으로써 통합적이고 실시간적이고 예방적인 효과를 가질 수 있다라고 하는 것으로 해서 이런 스마트 시티가 안전 도시에 적용했을 때 장점을 소개했었고요. 물론 세이프라고 하는 것을 되게 폭넓고 다루고 있어서 그 중에 한 부분이 범죄라든가 폭력과 같은 도시의 안세이프티와 시큐리티를 저해하는 요소라고 생각이 되고요. 그래서 일반적인 안전에 대한 여러 가지 예방 단계에서 우리가 빅데이터가 축적이 되면서 이 빅데이터를 가지고 이제 어떤 분석을 하는 인공지능 기법들이 사용하게 됨으로써 여러 가지 도시의 안전을 위해서 활용되고 있습니다. 한국에서는 특히나 이제 제가 이제 살고 있고 이제 근무하고 있고 연구를 하고 있는 서울에서는 이제 그 시민을 위한 안전 서비스로서 제공되고 있는데 보시겠지만 대부분 다 물리적인 어떤 재난재해와 관련된 부분들이 많이 있고요. 그리고 또 한 부분으로 이제 범죄 예방으로는 일반적인 셉티드라고 해서 이제 환경 설계를 위한 도시 예방 방법으로서 도시 공간에서 이제 주로 이제 불안감 같은 것을 매핑을 해서 어디가 위험하고 어디가 안전한지를 매핑을 함으로써 지수화하고 시민들에게 알려주는 방법이 사실은 매우 일반적으로 쓰이고 있는 방법이기도 합니다. 물론 유엔 해비tat에서는 인도의 뉴델리에 있는 단체와 같이 세이프티 핀이라고 해서 여성 안전을 위한 방법을 이런 접근법으로 사용해서 널리 보급을 하고 있기도 하고요. 그리고 한국에서의 또 다른 측면이라고 한다면 사실은 한국에서는 상대적으로 안전하다고 할 수가 있는데 이를테면 우리나라 한국에서 총기 소지가 불가능하기 때문에 대부분 이제 살인 사건이라든가 아니면 폭력이라든가 이런 게 매우 낮기도 하지만 또 그와 반대로는 심각한 문제로 발생하는 것이 어떤 그 취약계층에 대한 범죄, 디지털 성범죄라든지 여성에 대한 그 성범죄의 문제가 매우 심각한 문제이기도 합니다. 그래서 전반적인 위험도보다는 특정 계층에 대한 위험도와 그거를 줄이기 위한 노력들을 많이 하고 있고요. 그런 측면에서 데이터를 활용한다거나 그다음에 그 스마트 기술을 활용하는 것이 매우 유용한 것으로 인식되어 왔고, 물론 뒤에 설명드리겠지만 그거의 역기능과 그런 그 취약한 요인들도 물론 존재하기도 합니다. 다음에 두 번째 경험으로는 지금 현재 연구원에 있기 전에 제가 그 국영기업에서 있으면서 도시 분석가로 활동하면서 2015년부터 2018년까지 활동했던 내용이고요. 주로는 데이터 분석을 통해 가지고 어떤 도시의 안전을 분석하는 부분이었습니다. 처음에 이런 것들을 활동하게 된 계기는 사실은 아까 이제 피스키핑을 말씀하셨는데 초기에 제가 활동하는 게 오픈소스 활동을 하면서 그 유엔의 그 피스키핑 오퍼레이션 하는 부서와 조인트를 하면서 활동하게 되면서 SDG 프로그램에 관심을 가지고 이제 SDG 11 초기 단계에서 어떻게 활용하는지에 대해서 고민을 했었고요. 이제 그 와중에서 SDG의 그 17가지의 고을 중에서 도시와 관련된 11에 대한 고를 더 좀 더 많은 그런 이행 과제들을 이행하기 위한 이를테면 유엔 해비타트의 그 새로운 도시 의제, 뉴 어번 어젠다라고 하는 곳에서는 상당히 많은 구체적인 대안을 제시하고 있는 것으로 제가 알고 있고 접근을 해왔고요. 그래서 이제 그런 유엔 활동 중에 SDG 11을 보시게 되면은 안전이 있을 겁니다. 그래서 안전을 담당하는 부서가 이제 유엔 해비tat의 세이퍼 시티 프로그램이었고요. 요 보시면 가운데 4개 필러가 있는데 어떤 안전을 진단하고 액션 프로그램을 하고 이행을 하고 평가하는 요 단계가 있는데 요 과정에서 스마트한 방법을 접근해보자라고 해서 파트너십을 하게 되었습니다. 그래서 여기서 스마트라고 하는 것이 스마트한 테크놀로지만이 아니라 계속 이제 우리가 얘기하고 있는 이노베이티브한 혁신적인 접근법 그리고 이제 도시를 발전시키는 트랜스포머티브하게 발전시키기 위한 방법들을 다 스마트 시티의 범주 안에서 고민을 해왔었고요. 이제 그런 면에서 이런 파트너십을 하면서 세이퍼시티 프로그램에서 스마트를 같이 접근을 하기 위해서 어떤 지식의 공유에 대한 부분, 학습, 그 다음에 이런 혁신들을 지원하고 그 다음에 이거를 촉진시키기 위한 솔루션 부분에 대해서 어떻게 스마트한 방법을 접근하는지에 대해서 파트너십 단계에서 고민을 했었고요. 그래서 이제 그 중에 하나로서 데이터 분석을 통해서 도시를 좀 더 안전하게 해보자는 접근법으로 해서 파트너십을 하게 됐습니다. 그래서 이제 이렇게 하게 되면은 과연 이런 스마트 기술이 도시를 어떻게 안전하게 할 수 있을까라고 하는 측면에서 이제 SDG라고 하는 이제 보편적 2030 글로벌 고als 달성하기 위해서 SDG 11에서 안전한 측면을 달성하는 부분이라든가 분석이기 때문에 이제 프레임워크라든가 그다음에 특히나 취약계층에 대해서 우리가 사각지대에 있는 지역 사각지대에 있는 사각지대에 있는 사람들, 취약한 계층과 취약한 지역을 어떻게 식별할 것인가. 그다음에 가장 중요한 거는 이들을 위해 필요한 데이터를 어떻게 취득할 것인가. 데이터라고 하는 건 사실은 이제 꼬리표가 없긴 하지만 성이라든가 연령이라고 하는 것이 구분이 돼 있어야지만 그렇게 그 성인지라든가 이런 게 되어야지만 그런 계층들에 대해서 우리가 확인을 하고 어떤 대안을 도출할 수가 있을 거라고 생각이 됐고요. 그래서 이런 같은 고민한 결과로 해서 요 고민을 올해가 2022년이 그 유엔 해비tat의 큰 컨퍼런스인 세계 도시 포럼 11차 세계 도시 포럼 우프 11이 폴란드 카토비체에서 하고 있는 해기도 하고요. 그런 논의를 2018년도에 말레이시아 쿠알라룸푸르에서 우프 9에서 같이 파트너십을 하면서 고민했고요. 그래서 제가 이제 해비tat의 안전도시 프로그램에 나가서 세컨먼트로 나가서 같이 고민을 하게 된 내용들이 되고요. 그래서 앞서 나왔던 스마트하고 안전한 것들을 어떻게 결합을 할 것인가에 대한 고민을 해서 이제 결국에 스마트하고 안전한 것은 이제 스마트라고 하는 것이 아까 이제 트랜스포머티브하고 이제 이노베이티브한 접근법이라고 설명드린 것처럼 단순하게 스마트 테크놀로지가 아니라 혁신적이고 발전할 수 있는 트랜스포머티브할 수 있는 접근법을 안전도시에 결합하자라고 하는 의미로서 그런 걸 결합하기 위한 유용한 방법이 챌린지가 아니겠는가라고 해서 스마트 세이퍼 시티 챌린지를 통해서 그렇게 루슬리하게 이제 있는 개념들을 통합해서 접근을 해보자. 그래서 풀리 통합된 개념으로 접근을 해보자라고 하는 것이고, 스마트하고 이노베이티브한 접근법을 함으로써 챌린지를 통해서 도출함으로써 안전도시에 적용을 함으로써 도시가 좀 더 지속 가능하고 포용적이고 안전한 도시로 될 수 있겠다라고 하는 그런 기본 컨셉을 가지고 접근했고요. 이런 접근법을 발견하는 주체는 단순하게 개인뿐만이 아니라 다양한 계층들이 가능하겠다. 네네. 오케이. 네.
So sorry for interrupting. This is extremely interesting and we are all completely into it. But at this point, I would suggest let's stop it at this, just as initial introduction, and then continue during the Q&A session to go into this specific approach if you agree with that. And then if you also share these slides, this will also be very useful. Okay. Sure, absolutely. Go ahead.
네, 마지막에 그래서 이거를 시범적으로 해본 다음에 지원을 해서 실제 프로젝트로 해보자라고 하는 것까지가 저희 아이디어였고요. 그 다음에 이제 질의응답에서 좀 더 상세히 설명드리도록 하겠습니다.
Thank you so much. This is such a rich experience, so many things here, and I hope we will have also a follow-up opportunity to dig deeper into some of this. There are so many overlapping points with our previous work, especially on the importance of collecting the data and making sure that we actually have an evidence to measure what is really happening in the smart city, safe city field, which we often saw that is lacking, this evidence of the promoting of smart cities, safe cities. Thanks so much for this initial introduction. I will immediately give floor to Renee now to give us her perspective. Renee, I will not be able to do justice to your biography and the experience that you are having in data and AI field, but let us know what is AI ethicist doing and how you are approaching this topic. What lessons can you share with us? Then is Renee still with us? Maybe Renee had to drop.
I think she's dropped off, Branka, again. Yeah, I think she's still having technical difficulties.
Renee had some issues with the Wi-Fi, so let's give her a chance to reconnect, and I will then pass the floor to our next speaker, Marisa Belcotto, who is bringing to us this very interesting experience of Fugo Cruzado and joining us from Brazil. Maria, I will immediately pass the floor to you.
Okay, thank you, Branka. I don't know who's going to present. Oh, thank you very much. So I will try to be really quick. I know we have just a little bit of time. So hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Marisa Belcotto. I am a PhD in urban sociology, and I am now program director of Fogo Cruzado Institute. Today in Brazil, we are facing many problems concerning risks of smart cities technologies to citizen safety. Although I am quite aware of those risks and the importance of them, I believe information technology is a milestone very much needed to solve our problems here. And I believe that the answers to how to make them actually good instruments is accountability. I have been working with public safety for a lot of years. I have already worked inside governments, in civil society, with governments, with research. And during my career, I have witnessed amazing proposals fail and known outdated policies survive. I think all my experiences and disillusions would inevitably lead me to Fogo Cruzado, because I believe no change can ever actually become a reality without seriously affecting scales of power through social monitoring. And today I cannot envision how this can be made without information technology. So can you please pass the slide? In 20 years, more than 1 million people were murdered in Brazil. That means that as we are speaking here, 5 to 6 people are probably going to be violently killed in my country. More than 70% of them by gunshot. It's outrageous, right? Information like that should be enough to make politicians lose their sleep and do something, at least in my opinion. But as all this problem I just mentioned are the governmental responses to them. All of them were built on same fundamental error, absolute lack of accountability. Please, can you change the slide? So how can we monitor public safety policies and measure their success? In Rio, the province where Fogo Cruzado was created, we have access to monthly statistics on crimes. We can say with a good amount of certainty, month by month, if the number of people killed is going up or down, and if more people are complaining about having their cell phones or cars robbed. But that's it. Is it enough to evaluate a public policy? Or worse, is it enough material to design a public policy? If you live here, government will tell you yes. But how is the police contingent allocated in the streets? Which are the police priorities and how are they working towards them? Are there differences on how police is working based on different patterns of crime in different neighborhoods? Those are just some very important questions without answers. The lack of social control over public safety policies results in the never-ending cycles of deja vus. In 1994, a police operation in the favela Nova Brasília killed at least 13 people, allegedly to fight criminal migration. Last month, a police operation in the nearby favela Vila Cruzeiro would end in 23 people killed. Again, allegedly to fight criminal migration. What changed in almost 20 years? Honestly, nothing. Different governments of different political parties were able to maintain virtually the same failed policies by fostering people's fear through lack of information and active debate. Please, can you change the slide? So, Fogo Cruzado was created in this context, trying to be a part of the solution to it. In 2015, Rio de Janeiro was on the spotlight and public safety was collapsing. For example, in Complexo do Alemão, a famous set of favelas covered with a very known public policy called UPP, a local newspaper called Voice of the Community published a headline that said that in like 8 months, Complexo do Alemão had already identified 100 straight days of shootings in the favelas. This was not reported in the big newspapers. It was if it did not existed, but it was real. The real people that go out of bed and to work every day, that crosses different neighborhoods, especially but not restricted to the not so rich neighborhoods, they could feel and knew that security was getting worse and fast. And they were using local newspapers and especially social networks to inform their peers on what was going on and where. So it became quite clear for Cecilia Oliveira, founder of Fogo Cruzado, that we couldn't keep waiting for governments to do their job and start creating metrics of their processes and also start sharing it with us. If people knew what was happening and was already communicating it, it was possible to use information technology in our favor. It was a simple but radical idea. Through an application, we could give people the power to build knowledge on their daily lives themselves. We were literally trying to shift scales of power to people's fingertips. Knowledge would be built by people and for people. Information will be restricted no more. Can you please change the slides? Now, 5 years later, Fogo Cruzado is an institute, an NGO. Our mission, using open and collaborative technologies to promote social transformation and make cities safer, confronting armed violence and saving lives. Please change it again. We are the only data set on armed violence in our country. Our widespread relation of trust built with various audiences allowed us to have very detailed information about shootings on many of their impacts on cities where we operate. We keep stats about closed schools, shootings in shopping malls, pregnant women and children shot, police involvement in shootings, deaths, a lot of things. We publish this information in real time so people can stay safe as it happens. But we can also help to push for public action, put pressure on governments and politicians, press for change and accountability. The government was hiding the information on purpose. So we do the opposite. Everything is open source, open use, open. So everyone can see it and use it. And we help journalists and researchers and officials to use and understand it too. Please shift again. Cecilia's idea to gather information on widespread shootings in Rio with people who actually experiences this problem every day has proven to be a game changer here. And so we have grown. We have already tracked and checked more than 40,000 shots fired in 36 cities in Rio de Janeiro and Pernambuco. And we are just now preparing to launch Fogo Cruzado in Bahia, covering more than 13 cities near Salvador. Please shift again. Our methodology has been tested and certified by researchers and prestigious national and international universities, by investigative journalists, and even by public officials interested in doing their work better. Our numbers are being used everywhere to try and make it visible, what is hidden. Change it again. It's the last one, I promise. So we have many examples of how this methodology, this technology of information is helping us promote accountability. How can we use technology of information to promote accountability? But our time here is restricted and I have already run out of it. So I will focus on just one. Fogo Cruzado's existence was crucial to deconstruct the media initial support for federal intervention in Rio de Janeiro in 2018. Month by month, Fogo Cruzado was able to demonstrate the growing rates of armed violence that jumped from 15 episodes a day in 2017 to 27 a day in the second half of 2018. Numbers that were before not accounted for, that most often do not become criminal statistics, but affect people's lives profoundly and on a daily basis. Numbers that helped to disprove official speeches that life was better on the intervention because criminal statistics were dropping. How governments choose to face crime matters too. It affects how people can live their lives. And the intervention made life in Rio unbearable. Everyone could feel it. but authorities choose not to concern themselves with it. But at that time, something had changed. Fogo Cruzado's existence allowed the tools to prove it. Media withdrew their support for that failed policy, and its potential use in the upcoming elections of 2018 failed, including the president that proposed it. For me, that was a perfect example of collaboration through information technology. For me, that was a perfect example of collaboration through information technology and how it can exert control over governments and change policies. I think this is the key for us here. We can't have like a fetish on technology or smart cities. They can be helpful if they are accountable, if they are accounted, and if people, actual people that are living the problem, they have the means to control it too and use it to control and monitor government actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria Isabel. This was so inspiring and also a very interesting combination of Korea and Brazil and maybe different security situations in the city and then different technological solutions also coming to place, one through the smart city approach and the other actually from the community approach, ground level approach, showing directly how it can benefit the safety and security of citizens. So many things to dig deeper in here, but I'm glad that Renee is back. She joined the conversation again. Renee, can you hear us? Perfect. I will pass the floor to you because I think you can bring now another dimension to the conversation through your AI ethics work and maybe talk a little bit about the challenges as well of these approaches. Renee, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me and including me in this conversation. So yes, I'm a criminologist and an AI ethicist and a data activist. And my work really examines how do we use advocacy for change, looking at things like participation in civic data politics and political and social change, data activism within the constructs of data infrastructure and data politics, and just bringing some critical thinking around data and critical data science and ensuring that political participation and civic engagement and social change are included in discussions around smart cities as we engage data politics across the smart city landscape. So smart cities call for a reimagining of data. It really makes us think about democracy, data as measurement, really accuracy in the decision-making and equity in the policies around smart cities. It also forces us to, again, think about how do we democratize data across that city landscape and think about questions such as data accessibility and, of course, questions around using AI in that space, algorithmic decision-making and algorithmic reasoning. Due process, duty of care, this whole concept from an ethics perspective of doing no harm and bringing the requisite levels of due diligence that's required against a backdrop of justice and equity and diversity and inclusion. So while there are great rewards to the smart cities model, there are also great risks, and we need to reconcile smart cities within the context of American cities. So when we think of the history of American cities, we're thinking also of a history and a culture of distrust in urban spaces, distrust around the history of data and data collection, the relationship between minoritized communities and databases, database as seen as a racialized management system, and questions such as smart cities and AI and data-driven and computerized racism. And of course, there's that distrust between city dwellers, government systems, and of course, between city dwellers and each other. So we've got to speak about smart cities and its impact or its further impact on alienation and cultural dislocation and social exclusion and spatial isolation. And when we think about that history of distrust and we think about how the criminal justice system and the education system and healthcare and finance and mortgage systems and questions such as digital redlining. Will smart cities, exacerbate and answer that situation? So when we're thinking about smart cities, we've got to think about technology and we've got to think about trust. My work is at the intersection of AI and law enforcement. And what it forces us to do is look at the impact of surveillance technology. And we've got to start thinking about surveillance technology, because what smart cities does, it really amplifies surveillance, because we're doing lots of tracking and lots of tracing in that smart city formula. So when we think about surveillance technology, we're thinking about how does it disrupt privacy and free speech and due process within the smart city? How does it impact our civil liberties? How does it deal with questions such as the disproportionate use of our surveillance technologies against Black, brown, minoritized, vulnerable communities? And it really forces us to ask ourselves, are we creating a lethal landscape in smart cities? So we've got to think about the use of predictive technologies by law enforcement. We've got to also think about questions of accountability and transparency and explainability. And when we think about this black box, and we think about how we're using these algorithms, we've got to understand that the opacity of the black box in itself undermines accountability and transparency and explainability. So how do we make smart cities smart? And what I have been doing for the last 2 years, working at the University of Virginia as the data activist in residence, is really creating a response. And this response is called the Digital Force Index. And what it does, it gives you a digital force score. And it really challenges the dominant understanding that more surveillance technology means less crime or less police violence. And this tool, this Digital Force Index, that gives you a digital force score, what it does, it collates all the surveillance technologies being used in American cities. And it's a public accountability tool that really focuses on accountability, transparency, and building public confidence as well in the ways in which we use and think about technology. So it brings that entire value-sensitive, human-centered, user-centered, participatory design approach. And basically, when we think about smart cities, we have got to think about really whether or not we are prepared to give up some of those freedoms, some of our liberties for the convenience of the smart city. And just all I wanted to do was just present some other questions in the space. So while we know that smart cities can bring an extraordinary amount of efficiency and effectiveness to the ways in which we do the things that we do in cities, we've got to also pay attention to those risks. And those risks are critical because what they can do is they can really undermine our rights, our freedoms, and of course, reduce the kind of value that is critical to the ways in which we want to operate, in spaces, that digital spaces, and really bringing human dignity to digital spaces and understanding that relationship between data and human rights. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Renee. Again, so many things to pick up on, and I will just mention this power. It seems to me power dynamics play a huge role in how smart cities will be implemented, and also how it's very difficult to talk about one smart city. It seems to me we have many smart cities, like different implementations in different parts of the world, and also how context is important, how
Definitely.
different it is going right in the United States, how different it is in Brazil, in Korea, in many other countries. I will have a very tough role as a moderator today to really pick up some of these points and put them into conversation. But before we do that, and before I give floor to my colleague Daniel as a discussant, just a quick peek into the chat and all of the introductions that people made. It's impressive also to see the variety of cities that people are coming from. I wrote a couple of them, like Ankara from Turkey. We have DC, New York, Mexico City, Brasilia, Brazil. Many of you are bringing stories from your cities and from smart cities. Some of you already shared that in chat. Feel free to continue sharing, and I will also invite you to, if you are if you have an opportunity to unmute yourself and join the conversation, you are also invited to do that. Now I will pass first to Daniel, who we invited as a sort of a discussant, but also to tell us the story of peace in our cities. You are actually bringing a lot of knowledge and lessons learned of how we can achieve peace in our cities, how we can reduce violence, and how we are going towards this goal of halving the violence. But tell us, Daniel, also what you picked up from the introductions of our speakers and experts on smart cities. What can be used in your work? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Branka. Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for being here and for the invite. That was, I mean, that's tremendous. The breadth and kind of the detail of the different variants, if you will, of smart cities and kind of the impacts they can have. I mean, what it made me think is, you know, you put the question opportunities or risk for peaceful cities, and the answer is yes. The answer is that very obviously it's both opportunity and risk. And I think we've had a demonstration of, through our speakers, of some tremendous opportunities where IT and innovative technology can really help violence reduction in cities. And we have, I think, particularly through Marisa Bel's example and Renee as well, kind of the very clear picture of what the risks can be and how those very technologies that perhaps are intended for good or intended for reduction of violence can actually be counterproductive and can have the very opposite effect. I was mindful that, you know, how until Renee, very little was spoken about surveillance, which is usually when we talk about smart cities, there's this conflation in a lot of places between kind of smart, and the S is almost like the S of smart stands for surveillance. And in many ways, I think the conversation has shown us that perhaps that's a very distorted idea of what a smart city really should be. And this, you know, the overemphasis on the eyes, if you will, on the watching, on the social control, and not so much of an emphasis on some of the other aspects that a truly smart city should have. I mean, to use a fairly poor analogy, I think another part of a smart city is its brains. So very obviously, Dr. Choi talked about the importance of data and evidence and knowledge in putting together public policies that can impact in violence reduction. That's a tremendous use of technology. That's a tremendously positive use of technology. But perhaps there's also another part for a truly smart city, which would be its heart. And so I think perhaps that's a lot of the issues and a lot of the concerns that Renee spoke of, in the sense that you could theoretically have a smart city through some of these descriptions of a highly innovative, high use of technology and IT tools. You could have a city that's smart and safe, which is obviously primordial, but you could also have both of those things and not have a city that's respectful of the rights of its citizens, that's participatory in its public policies, that really looks at human security rather than just kind of a repressive security, and that respects human rights. So I think we need to maybe broaden when we talk about, it's great that Dr. Choi talked about smart and safe. I think that's already phenomenal, because we have to move away from just smart. Smart alone is not enough. And then I would argue that smart and safe alone are not enough, because there's this other aspect. And there's cities in the world, perhaps, I mean, I think we've been seeing a lot. I was just reading or looking at some materials in the New York Times about China that came out the last couple of days. You have cities that are incredibly smart in the sense of the use of technology, a bit scarily so in terms of privacy and use of kind of biometric data and so on and so forth. And they're very safe cities as well, if you just look at the levels of violence. But on the other hand, there's all these aspects of kind of what should be a more just, inclusive, peaceful society, which of course is what we at Pathfinders look at in terms of the implementation of SDG 16, that it would still be lacking from this model. So I think it's really important. I think that one of the things that our speakers talked about is that technology is a tool. It's not a means in itself, or it's not an end in itself. It's a means to deliver something. It's not a silver bullet. I quite like Marisa Bel's point about not fetish. Now I can't say it. Not using technology as a fetish, and that, as she knows better than I, has been done in Brazil a lot. There's a lot of particularly recent discussions that are just talking about, for instance, cop cams, right? So body cameras on police, as if that's going to be the silver bullet, and if that's going to resolve everything. And alas, obviously, there's all these other preoccupations. So I suppose just to finish quickly in terms of how this intersects with Peace in Our Cities. Peace in Our Cities, as I think most of you know, is a network of 22 cities, and it's both, very importantly, both of city halls and civil society. And I think this aspect of civil society speaks very much to what Fogo Cruzado is doing in Brazil, for instance, which is basically providing for a gap that government is not able or willing to provide, and that really talks about this participatory local knowledge, grassroots, civil society use. This is, for us at Peace in Our Cities, a very important aspect. That things should not be kind of a top to bottom approach. It shouldn't be the city hall defining what the violence reduction public policy of a city should be, but rather it should be inclusive and participatory, and include this broader aspect of the conversation. But I think just to finalize, we have this very ambitious wish that is to half urban violence by 2030 within the parameters of the SDGs. And to do that, we're going to need smart cities. We're going to need the data. We're going, particularly the intelligence aspect of it, for public policies of violence reduction. But we can't do it anyway. We need to do it in a way that takes into consideration the inequalities, that takes in consideration the respect of human rights and the participation of civil society. And this, I think, is really what animates Peace in Our Cities as a network, that it includes, it's very adamant about violence reduction, but not at all costs, right? That it be done in a humane way, in a participatory way, in a democratic way. So I think there's I think a lot to continue the conversation, and I think a lot of our members will be very interested to hear more from the speakers as well. So let me pass back to the actual experts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks so much for helping us understand closer this very important goal of your network. And I'm really curious to see in the future how this will overlap with the new technologies in general, not only in terms of smart cities. Many cities out there that are not officially applying smart technologies are introducing different modern technologies. I do want to give a quick comment on this surveillance, because Maria Isabel actually gave me this motivation to think about surveillance from another point of view as well, like who is watching the watchers, right? It's not always like that citizens are being surveilled, but there is a part of technology to also gather the data, to bring more transparency, and to actually call for accountability, as Renee also pointed out, right, with these technologies. So it really depends from which angle the technology is being applied in the smart city projects. I will read the first question that we got through from our audience, from Andres Pida, who is asking, as we are making decisions about people in smart cities, how is bias in data accounted for when implementing machine learning and data initiatives in these smart cities? Whenever we work with data, we have to think about the bias, how that comes into conversation now. Whoever would like to respond to this one.
I could.
Or I can call for Renee.
Sure. So that's an excellent question. And that's exactly what we're seeing, particularly in the US context, because much of the technologies that we're using are being built using historic data. And historic data in the United States is really plagued with an extraordinary amount of bias and discrimination and systemic racism, because that data has been collected from enslavement through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, and through many of the oppressive policies in the United States. So we keep thinking we're creating new technology, but are we doing that if we're using old data? So bias and discrimination so critical. So when I spoke about reimagining data within the context of the smart cities, we've got to do that. Because what we've also realized is that many of the technologies that are being deployed in the predictive policing space, preemptive technologies or preemptive police technologies, are definitely plagued with bias. So when we think about the smart cities, in particular, I speak from the US context, how are we making these cities smart? Who are we making them smart for? If we are continuously using this data sets that, and it's also part of my work, these data sets that transmit intergenerational trauma. So when we think about smart cities in the United States, we think about redlining. Now we're thinking about digital redlining. And when we think about those cities, how far does the smart city model go? Does it go into the underserved communities? Does it go into those high-need communities? How do we deal with our undocumented population when we have smart technologies and surveillance technologies being deployed, let's say, by ICE? So what happens to our undocumented, our immigrant, our refugees communities? So I think we've got to really sort of rethink, the smart cities model within the context of using biased, discriminatory data sets. Very, very important question. And so much of my work is just situated in that space.
And we can have an entire forum basically covering only the issue of bias, which I hope we will have a chance as some follow-up discussion to cover in more details. Thank you, Renee, for covering this. I just posted an article, a research actually from Professor Sarah Chiumbu, who is Associate Professor at University of Johannesburg, who did not manage to join us today, but we really wanted to have an African perspective into conversation as well and make some more comparisons. So have a look at the paper, but I will try to bring African voices from one of our audience members who sent us a question from Uganda saying that Uganda acquired a camera surveillance system in 2019 from Huawei at a cost of 120 million to curb crime. The cameras are installed in most parts of Kampala, but this has done very little to curb crime. So how has the use of surveillance cameras in developed cities like New York, or I will add here in Korea, how has these technologies been able to curtail crime, and how can this be applied in cities like Kampala? So how come in certain cities the same technology works, in other doesn't? So maybe I will give this question directly to Dr. Choi, if you want to comment on this and say in your experiences, also through experience of your work in Habitat, how we can now find some sort of an answer to this.
네, 먼저 한국의 경험을 말씀을 드리면은 카메라를 설치하게 되면은 사실은 그 설치한 지역은 범죄가 감소가 되는데 그 범죄가 다른 지역으로 가는 풍선 효과라는 게 발생을 해가지고 범죄의 총량은 카메라로 인해서 반드시 줄어들지 않는다라고 저희가 많은 연구에서 확인을 한 바가 있고요. 그 대부분의 그 스마트 시티에서 범죄 예방을 하기 위한 기술이 주요 기술이 CCTV와 같은 기술을 통해서 예방을 하는데 우리가 그 이제 일단은 가능성이라고 본다면은 최근에 딥러닝을 중심으로 한 머신러닝 기술로 해가지고 비정형 데이터를 정형 데이터로 바꿈으로 해가지고 우리가 읽어서 예측을 하고 판단할 수가 있는 반면에 비용이 많이 들어가지고 그거로 인해 가지고 조금은 민간 회사에 좀 의존하게 되고 그로 인해 가지고 아까 말했던 그런 감시라고 하는 것이 민간에서 그 시민 영역에서 감시가 돼야 되는데 그런 감시라고 하는 것이 안 되고 민주화가 안 되는 문제가 있다고 보여지거든요. 그래가지고 그런 면에서 봤을 때 이런 그 아프리카 도시들에서 이런 스마트 CCTV를 도입하는 데 있어서는 조금 비용이 많이 들어서 과연 비용 효과적일까라고 하는 부분이 있어서 조금은 다른 방식의 접근법이 더 필요하겠다. 그래서 시민들이 위험한 정서를 먼저 모니터링해서 그걸 기록을 해서 피한다거나 조금 낮은 정도의 기술부터 접근해가는 게 좋지 않을까 하는 생각이 들고, 비용이 많이 들게 되면 또 다른 면에 이를테면은 대기업이라든가 다른 외국계 기업에 의해서 자본이 들어가서 또 다른 목적에 의해서 조금 그런 데이터에 대한 자율성이 떨어져오기 때문에 조금은 아까 말했던 감시에 대한 영역으로 들어가지 않을까 생각합니다. 네, 이상입니다.
Thank you, Dr. Choi. Again, such a big topic that we can spend so much time on. But I would like to bring another dimension now, again, looking into these contrasts between different countries and sometimes even contrast between the smart cities in democracies and strong democracies. And smart.
Can I just make a quick comment there?
Sure, go ahead, Renee.
Sure, just on the comparison, because what we've realized in the US through this Digital Force Index, which collates all the surveillance technologies being deployed on the streets, is that surveillance technology has done very little to reduce crime in any American city. What we've only seen is the deployment of surveillance technologies in underserved, high needs, minoritized communities, and the continuous over-policing of these already traumatized and vulnerable spaces. So what we are trying to do with this Digital Force Index is to let policymakers rethink the amount of money they are investing in surveillance tech and use that to support communities in more resilient and sustainable ways. So surveillance technology has really done very little to reduce crime and criminality and violence in American cities.
Thanks so much, Renee, for sharing
this. Can I please jump in here?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
Because I agree completely with Renee. I think it's the same problem we have in Brazil. We have like growing surveillance technology being implemented right now in Brazil. So now the new fever is body cams and facial recognition, and it's like it's tragic what's going on. People getting arrested for nothing without doing nothing, and everyone thinking that body cams and police will solve police killings. And what can I say is that normally this kind of surveillance works against poor people, especially Black poor people in Brazil, especially Black poor people that lives in favelas. And we have had a big crisis with ONG, big NGO, because they were trying to implement predictive policing in Brazil. And it really doesn't work here because it doesn't take into consideration all the biases you have on the data that will support this prediction algorithm. So I will have to actually get out of this meeting. I'm so sorry. But what I would like to say is that Fogo Cruzado's experience is that tools will do what we want them to do. So it matters who are building those tools, those technologies, who are behind those technologies, why these technologies are being implemented. This is a big fight right now in Brazil. Of course, we need body cams and police. We do need them because police is killing people without any kind of surveillance of what they are doing. But we need to have it really clear why and adjust the protocols to these whys. So civil society needs to be a part of the implementation of those policies on smart cities. And most important, it's not any civil society. We need Black civil society from poor areas, from favelas. They need to be part of that. So this is something we are discussing here. We need to implement orbs, like councils of civil society controlling those policies. I think what matters the most right now in Brazil is that many techs could help us fight the problem of violence, but they only will help us if they are accounted for. And we do not have democracy when we talk about public safety, not in Brazil, not in other places, but I can speak of in Brazil. We don't have nothing that gets like quite close to democracy here. Here we have a highly militarized model that gets civil society, especially poor Black civil society, completely outside, because it reserves to this poor Black civil society the place of victims of this violence. So it is important they don't be a part of what we are thinking. So what I would like to say is tools matter, they are important, but if we don't know exactly why and who are creating those policies, and if we don't have control over this, it won't go, it won't work in a way to help people. It will only make more victims. So this is what we are trying to change in Fogo Cruzado, to creating a tool by the public, by the people, for the people, and completely open. So everyone knows what it is, how it is built, and how you can work with it. So I'm sorry, I speak too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Isabel. This was great, and I think brings a very important message of how we bring these initiatives now from the community to become part of smart cities. So again, this bottom-up creation of these and using these technologies in a positive way for the communities they should actually serve, which is, as you pointed out, very complicated issue in countries that are not free. So how do we create safe, free, smart cities in countries that are not that free? I know that we are so over time, and I apologize for this, but this is such an interesting conversation. I do want to give a final, like one sentence to each one of you. Maria Isabel, if you have to leave, thanks so much that you joined us. Hopefully we will continue this conversation further, but I would like to pass to Junyoung, Grené, and Daniel for your final one-sentence conclusion. What do you got from this conversation, or piece of advice that you have?
Well, I can go quickly. I think what people need to always understand is technology is a way of thinking. And who's designing that technology, and what are they thinking? And what we've been seeing within the smart city context is not enough attention being placed on the question of what's happening in our cities, and the fact that our cities are populated with our underserved minority communities, and they need to be a part of the smart cities model, which has not really paid attention to how do we treat with those core groups that are so critical to the ways in which we're thinking about data and peace.
Dr. Choi, you can go next.
네, 제가 UN 해비tat에 근무할 때 제 동료가 브라질에서 온 친구였는데요. 지금 상파울로 시청에 근무한다고 들었는데, 그때나 지금이나 이제 안전의 범죄 예방에 대해서 할 때는 상당히 많은 간극이 있었습니다. 한국에서는 범죄 발생보다는 불안감이라고 하는 fear of crime이라고 하는 게 더 큰 비율을 차지해서 실제 발생한 것보다 더 큰 느낌을 갖고 있고요. 그리고 그 이면에는 기술을 엄청 많이 적용했기 때문에 조금은 기술의 부작용 같은 경우도 많이 나타나지만 한국 사람들은 모르는 사이에 그 부작용을 체화하실지도 모르고요. 그래서 이런 새로운 기술들이 어떻게 적용이 되고 어떤 부작용과 긍정적인 상황이 나타난다면은 한국을 테스트베드로 연구를 하기를 권해보고 싶습니다. 네, 이상입니다.
Daniel, back to you as a final word of advice.
Well, I'm not going to try to summarize because it was extremely rich, but I just wanted to pull one thread that's, I think, very obvious, but perhaps should be stated explicitly from what Maria Isabel said and from what Renee said, which is kind of the old adage, follow the money, and is the economic motivations of a lot of the surveillance technologies, particularly a few companies and a few individuals in mostly the global north are making a huge amount of money to develop and sell and kind of be, you know, fairly messianic about the importance of these systems around the world, and the results, as Renee said, are dubious at best. But I think it's important to remember, you know, the economic interest behind a lot of these and kind of how that intersects with the political systems in places, why these systems oftentimes are so well thought of and get through difficult political processes, and how they do that. Like, and again, the question of like, who really is benefiting from this, to perhaps finish on a bit of a somber note, but I think that's important to remind.
A very important message. Thank you all for sharing. I shared a book suggestion as well on smart enough cities. So it really, we need to be careful how we define smart, what smart is, and maybe sometimes we just need smart enough cities. I would love really this to be just the beginning of a longer conversation that we will have, because I think it's crucially needed, and we need to follow. We need more evidence. We need more data of what is happening in smart city space. And I would like also to promise that we will collect some of these resources that our speakers shared, so you can learn more about their work. And of course, we will share the recording of this session. So huge thank you again to Renee, Junyong, Danielle, Paige. Thank you to NYU CIC for hosting this session. And I look forward to the next opportunity to discuss this topic. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.